Let's first talk about the editing. As I edit my own films, I wrote the script with the edit in mind. If you notice, every time I cut from the or to the psychiatrist's chamber, I relied on something which I call the affirmation. Look at this first transition.
Your wife needs you, Mr. Mukherjee.
I cut on the moment when the doctor says, your wife, and shows a close-up of Rhea. That's an affirmation. Due to Kuleshov's effect, your mind subconsciously thinks that she is the one the doctor is referring to. I tried to emphasize the same thing again on this scene with a J cut. This is a cut where the audio from the preceding scene already becomes audible while the present scene is still on screen.
All her recent mood swings, unpredictable behavior, emotional outbursts, everything is a ramification of a mental illness.
Notice what's being said by the doctor while I hold on to her close-up.
All her recent mood swings.
This is another affirmation to your mind. And finally, if this wasn't enough on this scene, I used an L cut on the exact moment where the doctor says, your wife.
An incident most people would view as an accident or coincidence. Your wife.
Here, I used an L cut where the audio continues from the previous scene while the next scene has already come onto the screen. These types of cut help the edit flow much smoother, and here I have used this technique for an added advantage, that's the affirmation. All these were very thoughtfully crafted from the script writing process itself. I believe this was very necessary and helped to guide the audience's mind in a certain direction, and it works on a subconscious level. While writing these kind of deceiving moments, you have to be very careful, otherwise it may have an adverse effect on your audience and they may find out exactly that you are trying to deceive. So use these techniques very skillfully, intelligently and sparingly for your psychological thrillers. Although you can't be sure if all this will have the desired effect on your audience, but at least you have to try, right? As much as I love all these things that I have done, but due to the lack of budget, I also had to incorporate a narrative structure that I myself hate the most, and that's the use of exposition. All these short films that I have made so far are heavily dependent on narrations and expositions, which I'm trying to avoid as much as I possibly can in the future. So I'll just advise you to try your best not to rely on such things, but at the same time, don't be afraid of using these techniques to your advantage where necessary. As I have said earlier, the film has two main twists. One is that the police officer is also suffering from paranoia, and the second one is the police officer herself is the wife of Mr. Mukherjee. These two twists are revealed in a series one after the other. As I wanted to make a film on paranoia, I used the character of Rhea to show and demonstrate the repercussions of paranoia while the doctor is describing everything about paranoia to Mr. Mukherjee and apparently to the audience. So this film is not about the character of Rhea or the police officer, or even if Rhea intentionally killed the guy or in self-defense. This film is mainly about paranoia. Paranoia is the main character here. A lot of people got confused whether Rhea or the police officer who actually suffered from paranoia. But I think it's pretty clear. When you get to know that the police officer is the actual wife of Mr. Mukherjee, then it is confirmed that she was obviously suffering from paranoia since her childhood. Now, whether you want to believe that Rhea was also paranoid or not, it is totally up to you. But honestly, if you ask me, there is nothing much left for the imagination, and it is almost clear that Rhea was also paranoid and she actually killed her stalker, but not intentionally. She was convinced that her stalker wanted to do harm to her, and the book she was reading added to her paranoia, and she eventually killed the poor guy. I believe when you're paranoid, these things such as the book, actually leave an impact on you, and this scene is there to demonstrate this negative effect of paranoia. Now let's talk about the climax a bit, especially how I designed the twists to unravel. Here I'm actually going to tell you some of my secrets on how I design such twists in my stories. I believe there are three types of audiences. One is the kind of audience who just watch a film as it is. They don't get that intellectually involved in the story, and they will take the story on the surface level. As an example, a such audience will be more interested in knowing whether the character of Rhea actually killed the guy intentionally or she is telling the truth and killed him in self-defense. They will take the film as it is, and when the twists are revealed, they will be super shocked and totally surprised. The twists will come up as totally unexpected to them. They will get the ultimate experience of watching the film. Then there are two other types of audiences who get a bit more intellectually involved while watching a film. They use their brains a lot, and while watching such suspense thrillers, they continuously try to solve the mystery beforehand. So as a filmmaker, you have to deal with such audiences in a smart smart way and will definitely have to keep them in mind while constructing your stories. The second type of audience will constantly question everything that you are showing them and will develop a sense of being deceived. That's why they won't believe everything that you are showing on the surface level and will constantly think that there is something else. For example, here, such an audience may think that Ria actually killed her stalker intentionally and is not innocent, and she is very cunning and playing with the police officer's mind, and they may expect that this may be a twist at the end. So these kinds of audience try to solve the mystery, but you have to prove them totally wrong. So you have to feed them some false information as well to provoke them to think in such a way, but you have to include these in a very subtle way. Basically, you have to outsmart them. And at the climax, when they see that they are totally wrong and all the information were in plain sight, they actually enjoy the film. Otherwise, if they find out what they had thought is actually the case, then they find the film to be very predictable and ultimately they don't get to like the film at all. Now, there is a third type of audience who are the most critical to deal with. I believe I myself belong to this category. So whenever I write a thriller with twists and turns, I always check from an audience perspective and see if I were to watch the film, whether or not I could have predicted those twists. Now let me tell you, to deal with such audiences, how I approach the twists. So I design the twists in layers. One is a very obvious one to feed their ego, and I save another one which is totally unexpected but pretty obvious from the very beginning and was hidden in plain sight. When done effectively, this can have a mind-blowing experience on the audience. So I believe this third kind of audience would predict the first twist perfectly, and when this happens, they somehow feel very intelligent about themselves. Then you have to keep on going with this twist as if this was the only twist. By this point, the first two types of audience have already got the twist, and the third type of audience are having a eureka moment and they leave their intellectual involvement for a moment. Then you introduce your last twist as a trump card. At this moment, the first two types of audience are blown away and the third type of audience also gets mind. So it depends on the climax and how you deal with it. Your film may have a mind-blowing effect or a pretty mediocre one. Now I think to have these twists turn out to be completely unexpected, you have to include some false information to drive the audience's mind to different directions. Here this surreal sequence comes into play. This sequence serves mainly two purposes. One is to convey the inner turmoil of a paranoid person in somewhat of an artistic way, and secondly, to act as a false information. It has nothing to do with the main story. I kept it as if it is so important, but the sole purpose of keeping this scene was in an attempt to deviate the mind of the audience from concentrating on the fact that the character of Oyon handed over a piece of paper to Ria. I think a lot of people will guess it here in this scene only that the death threat is the Wi-Fi password previously given to her by the character of Oyon. I knew that a lot of people will predict this scene perfectly, but still I kept this scene just to make sure that my original twists work out properly. So I believe keeping a few predictable twists are also necessary in order to have a better and much bigger impact by the revelation of the original twists. When your audience take you for granted, that's an actual opportunity to show your intellect. I think you got my point. Now, I'm not saying that only being successful at executing a great twist necessarily make a film great. There are other more important things that you need to focus on while developing a story, like characterization and all. I have talked about all these in detail in some of my previous videos, which are linked to down in the video description below. So if you're interested, then you may want to check out those videos as well. I haven't got the opportunity yet to make a film where I can play with these things more, but I'm working hard to make some of my more mature scripts in the near future. Let's see if I can finally make that happen, or I'll have to settle for another compromised script. Anyway, so if you're constructing a thriller, you may keep these points in mind. One is to treat your audience intelligently. Remember, if you can shock the third type of audience, then you are in the right track. And secondly, have some not so impactful twists just to have a greater impact from the much more unexpected moments. And you can achieve that with some well-placed false information. And finally, make sure you do all these things intelligently and in a very subtle way so that it has its effects only on the subconscious level of the audience. If you can achieve all these things, then I believe you can create an experience your audiences will cherish forever. Now that I've talked so much, let me share the lessons I learned from my mistakes while making this short film. For Paranoia, as I did the camera work myself, I was so focused on the cinematography and the technical side of the film, I think I couldn't get to direct my actors properly. If I were to make the film again, this time I would focus more on the performance side. I would do a lot more rehearsals with all my actors prior to the final shoot. Another mistake that I believe I made is I wrote and shot the film in 2017 and did the post-production work in 2018 and finally released the film in 2019. In these 2 years, I have learned so many new things. I evolved so much as a filmmaker and even as a person. So I released a short film in 2019 which was actually made in 2017. I think this doesn't serve you as your current portfolio. While I was making the film, I myself was paranoid and the story came directly from my heart. And I believed in the story and it was so important for me to tell it. But during these 2 years, I have recovered a lot, and when I finally released the film in 2019, I was not that paranoid at all. Not anymore. So in all this time, I had completely lost the connection with the film, the script, the story and everything. I just finished the film for the sake of it and that's it. So I believe I had lost the honesty that I started with. So I think I wouldn't want to take so much time in making my next film once the production starts, as it may have rather adverse effects while trying to make it perfect. No film is ever made perfect. No filmmaker is actually fully satisfied with their films. The day I'll get fully satisfied with one of my creations, then that will be my last creation, and I wouldn't want to experience that. That's it for today, guys. I'll see you in the next video.